Okay, I think we're all set up. Hello, everyone. Shabbat Shalom, Roos Hardy. I think that's how it goes, right? Please correct me if I'm wrong. Oh, I am excited! Went from Cathedral of the Deep to Faron to Karthus to Izalith and now Irithyll. Oh! I love talking Dark Souls 3 lore. So great. And I want to again thank everybody who's been joining in the chat, watching the VODs, all that, commenting on the videos, liking, subscribing, everything. It has made this entire playthrough so worth it. I mean, this could have been really painful for me this year, having to essentially replay the game basically a third time this year, just so I can get screenshots for the website, and you guys have really made it its own unique experience that I truly appreciate. So again, thank you. I cannot show my appreciation more through this character model. Now, that the sappy stuff is out of the way, as you may notice, I am wearing the helmet, and I can in fact roll with it. I did the farming necessary to make up for the 30k lost souls I lost last stream. Ouch. I mean, I guess 30k in 3 hours could be worse. I also was able to purchase some black iron gauntlets, though we're a little over encumbered still, so we will slowly add them as the vitality stack goes up. Oh boy. As we can see here, we're back at Horus's area. Now Anri has sort of left a prism stone as a guidepost, as sort of like a nice little way of saying sort of like to find your way back to me, or, in a sense. As we can see, we got his halberd that's been broken and laid on, and she's put up the rocks to sort of serve as this little grave monument. And most notably, we see the shield. Now, as you may recall, we picked up this shield. So, yeah. Much like I mentioned earlier with Hawkwood, we have this example where the game is giving us items that would make sense normally in the narrative, but there are places where those items are still being held by their owners in other places, and we can't really easily justify it as, oh, you just had a double or something like that. Yeah, so this is again one of these cases where it's probably just gotta assume that the shield we get from Horus is non-canon, much like how we can't loot his armor, we have to buy it from the Shrine Handmaid. Again, this isn't Skyrim, so it is what it is, but it's a neat little detail to show that Anri has in fact figured out that, yeah, Horus was down there, just dead. Another detail that's worth talking about is the fact that we had a lot of Drang Lake items in Smoldering Lake. Now, these Drang Lake items are, I think, Dragon Rider, Great Bow, the Shield of Wands, so like very specific items for like very ranking parts of Drang Lake's culture. Obviously, they're very distinctive. And there's, of course, the question, well, why are there Drang Lake items here? I mean, Karthus, Izalith, I mean, where does Drang Lake fit into this? Well, as we may recall, there was once upon a time an entrance to Irithyll, a staircase at least, leading down here into Smoldering Lake. It seems that Irithyll set up this three-pronged ballista that was being managed by some giant slaves who were recently killed by the Karthus warriors we also encounter up there. So it seems that Anor Londo / Irithyll, I'll just say Irithyll, just keep it simple until we actually get to Anor Londo. Irithyll was having defenses set up to deal with any threats, but obviously the principal enemies to face here would be the demons if they were still alive. We also, of course, know that the Chaos Demons have, in fact, been, massacred, as they have basically, not only are they all around dead, except for the deacons who are giving them some final rites, we also have to deal with the unfortunate implication of the smoldering carrion. Oh, that's why. don't have stats that have, man, that did not work out as I planned. I just wanted to kill some crabs. That was my first mistake. I was like, oh, I can totally deal with these. Anyway, so, yeah. That's why. Now, the problem for the demons seems to have been that not only are there bodies, there's also the smoldering carrion. These carrion, again, are rotten meat, which presumably revived not due to necromancy, but because of the grudges of the deceased. They are very resentful in death, and so that rouses them back to life as they, you know, kind of all gather together as that smoldering splatters of flesh. The end result of this is that there has to be someone who's been killing all these demons, and clearly in a way that at least those that died feel it was particularly unjust and have strong feelings about it. The ballistas having free reign because of these trees falling down on this side, and only this side, further cement this idea that there was some sort of conflict. Now, we have evidence of at least one of these parties, which of course would be Irithyll. Obviously, Sulyvahn, or even if we try to ignore Sulyvahn for a minute, Irithyll would have every reason to be concerned about chaos demons under their feet. Now, recall that the Recall that Anor Londo had a similar concern with Izalith after the witch decided to break off the alliance and essentially challenge the lords right at the last minute when the Age of Fire was about to end. Or, well, I guess it should be say it was imminent. The point being, of course, is that that is something that would be fresh in the minds of anyone who would live in a culture which succeeds Anor Londo. And so, obviously, you don't want to risk it with these demons. You just never know. Now, from what we can tell, the demons seem to be living rather peacefully by themselves, you know, minding their own business down here. They're just trying to, you know, preserve what's left of their culture, considering how much of it's been lost, Chaos Flame included. As a result, they were massacred. Now, that's only one party, and that still doesn't get us to the Drang Lake connection. So, bear with me. Let us now consider how there was the stray demon acting as Lothric's gatekeeper back on the bridge. Now, again, the point of making much like the stray demon in Dark Souls 1, the implication would be that this was a prisoner of war taken far and away from Izalith for the purposes of, well, basically for the purposes of essentially showing off. Once that was accomplished, they were able to take other items as well that are related, but we'll see those later when we get to Grand Archives. But suffice to say, this combined with later revelations that Lorien slew the quote-unquote demon prince tells us that not only did Old Iron King have a successor, though it likely wasn't his biological son due to the nature of the demon's physiology, but rather proof that there's also this conflict between Lothric and the demons. So again, taking it all together, we have two parties who are involved. Now, I've talked previously about the idea that Irithyll under Sulyvahn and Lothric under Osseros are in fact, constantly collaborating. We saw this at the Cathedral of the Deep, with Lothric's slaves, some of Osseros' personal knights, bodyguards being sent over there, obviously the Crystal Sage being set up to help facilitate the Road of Sacrifices and all that. Sort of, there's tons of stuff on Lothric helping out with Sulyvahn, because obviously Sulyvahn's the one who sent Aldrich to the Cathedral of the Deep, and was ultimately basically trying to go from cleansing him to imprisoning him and stuffing him up so he can become a Lord of Cinder for Lothric to ultimately use. So again, it's a back and forth. And it goes to show you that the alliance between the two countries has never been stronger. Hey Sneed, welcome in. Glad to see you today. I wanted to do this stream a little earlier to have some different people on that haven't been on or would like to be on but can't because of the time zones and all that, and I'm glad to see you make it. Yeah, and then we'll do that, okay? And with that in mind now, we have this idea of, okay, Lothric, Irithyll, in a joint, joint armies, come in and massacre the demons. Well, what is Irithyll's forces, though, beyond just some slaves and a ballista? Well, if you recall earlier, there were the Drang Knights at the Cathedral. These knights were mercenaries who claim inheritance from Drang Lake and gather some old Drang Lake equipment, especially the rare kinds, as we see with their armor. And the implication would, of course, be that, okay, they like to collect Drang Lake's legacy and try to live up to it, and in terms of being a country known for the legend of the fire linking. In that respect, it makes sense then for us to see Drang Lake items in their possession, even among their dead, even if it isn't stuff that's explicitly connected to them. In that case, we have to also consider, what are the mercenaries doing at the Cathedral? Well, they seem to be there to help destroy the corruption, right? Well, you hire mercenaries, that's what you do. We also know, of course, that if they're connected to the legend of the linking of the fire, then they would naturally want to, how do you say this? Help the countries and forces who are principally involved in preserving the age. In that case, Lothric would be a good candidate, but so would Irithyll. Especially when you consider that Irithyll, of course, has gods and things related to that, as we'll see shortly. And the demons were, of course, foes to Anor Londo in the past. The point being is that these mercenaries, quite likely, would pledge themselves or offer their services to Irithyll for the purposes of letting their mission statement to, I guess, hold up Drang Lake's legacy, and bring it to fruition. Oh. The problem for them, however, was that some of them seemed to have been brought to the Cathedral of the Deep. And, of course, when Aldrich basically starts his own cult that's separating from the Way of White, there's a split among the mercenaries. Some fall to the dark, as traitors, quote-unquote, and these traitors essentially assist in, apparently, Aldrich killing the rest, along with the clergymen who also stayed true to the faith, and be added to his food baths. The final result of this, of course, being that the mercenaries were sent there, and again, presumably from Irithyll, much like how Lothric contributed, Osteros contributed some of his forces, Sulyvahn would contribute some of his. Again, this then brings the idea of, okay, if some of the mercenaries are sent to the Cathedral, then some may have stayed behind and ended up involved in this demon war, where, okay, Lothric sends his armies with their crown prince to deal with things, and then Sulyvahn, of course, is having the ballista set up, but also sending his mercenaries to take part. And then both parties do so. Now, the idea would be that all the mercenaries seem to have died, at least any that matter, which would leave just the traitors that we talked about earlier at the Cathedral of the Deep. And, of course, we'll be seeing those shortly. Now, again, this is a bit of the Drang Knights story is, again, one of the more context-heavy ones. Again, this is why it's a little hard for kind of me to explain without, like, taking the time to really write it out. So, thank you for bearing with me as I try to cover this all at the top of my head before I've even eaten. They didn't level adaptability. Yeah, that's the problem. They didn't know, Sneed. They didn't know. They didn't know. How could they have possibly known? I mean, do you see an adaptability stat here? How are they supposed to know that they were supposed to get adaptability in order to truly live up to the Drang Lake legacy? Alright, so anything from our girl? We also have some stuff with nothing too crazy here. Obviously we have Zorig. Then we have Horus. We'll talk about Horus as we continue, because I want to get a little bit farther. Yeah. No, actually, we'll cover it now, because this is something that's worth pointing out at this moment. Now, Horus wears the Executioner set. This, of course, besides being a reference to demon souls again, we have a example here of, okay, we have this terrible executioner who, of course, really loved his job, and we actually acquired this executioner's weapon back at the Cathedral of the Deep. Recall the corpse that looked beheaded. Sorry about that. That looked beheaded over at the corner in the graveyard. And along with him, we, of course, said there was another corpse. It looks like it was one of the corpses buried there, but unlike some of the other corpses we see that were half buried there, this one was fully exhumed. Now, it's like, okay, well, why is there one body fully exhumed, and then this body of the executioner seemingly, ironically, executed by beheading like his sword was supposed to? And they left the sword. That's even weirder. Apparently, the executioner's armor was looted by Horus, or it somehow ended up in his possession. Now, this executioner was apparently killed and stripped of his armor. And more importantly, it reveals one important detail about Horus. Yes, it's also cool that the Drang Knights use the dual-wielding thing with their weapon style. Yeah, that's a cool thing. And it ties into what we're going to talk about here. The Drang Knights don't like using shields. And here we see Horus has a very important detail. Horus is one of only 2 children to escape Aldrich's clutches. Now, you already think, okay, so this tells us that Horus is at the cathedral, and apparently they escaped Aldrich. Well, that sounds very scary. Well, the localization is wrong here. What they are actually saying is that Horus is Aldrich's child and one of 2 who managed to escape. So very important detail. Horus is Aldrich's child. That means that Aldrich has been siring kids, and apparently at the cathedral, because that's where Horus was. Now, recall earlier what we were talking about with Rosaria? How Rosaria seems to have been used as a baby factory to seemingly feed Aldrich. Just, pump out the kids, and whenever our homeboy thinks they're right, just throw them off into the food pads, and he'll get some fresh baby meat, or, young kid meat. Just depend, again, whenever he decides they're ripe. Yeah, what a loving family. What this implies, of course, is that Rosaria has to have someone impregnating her consistently. Well, as we can see, as we learn later, Rosaria has a soul connected to Guinevere, and we can connect this thus to her being a child of Guinevere, but this soul has been twisted and corrupted, unlike any other boss soul we see. And it's related to the deep, as we can see from the maggots she's producing, both when she's doing the transformations, as well as when those maggots burrow in and transform the entire her followers into maggot men themselves. Every once in a while, I think about how Final Fantasy XIV, they changed Midgardsum's dialogue to be more obtuse to appeal to Westerners. I have no knowledge about that, so I honestly can't tell you. I can't comment honestly, though. It is interesting to think that being obtuse, it would be something that Westerners would prefer. To be honest, it's definitely not my taste. But anyway, the point being with back to Horus, of course, is that, well, if Horus is Aldrich's children, then, and Aldrich and Horus would presumably have been born at the cathedral, well, we know one person who has who would be giving birth to kids here at the cathedral. So, and we know that Rosaria was corrupted by someone related to the deep. So again, the shoe fits. Now, obviously, the idea that Rosaria was essentially used as a sex slave by Aldrich in order to farm his food is a horrifying concept worthy of his name, Eldritch. But suffice to say, Horus's story doesn't end there. Horus and Anri apparently survived Aldrich because eventually he has to go and become Lord of Cinder. And, well, what are the deacons, the bishops, going to do with these kids that are left behind? Well, they obviously don't want to have to keep feeding and take care of them if they don't have to. They got all these horrors they got to deal with. Rosaria they got to keep alive because, she's a goddess and, guest from the Pontiff and all that, as we'll get into shortly. But the sad thing about this is that, well, what are we going to do with the kids? Well, we could kill them ourselves, but, that's kind of icky. We'll hire a formal executioner to honorably do it. Now, the executioner, as we learn, really likes his job. He loves it. He doesn't care if he's got to kill, like, a few young kids, probably like in their teenage years at most, right? Like they're probably fairly young. Like they're probably like 15, 16, 18, maybe 20s if we really want to push it. But they managed to survive for a while. And then okay, you just take them out back to the graveyard where they can later be buried and, you know, execute them. Well, evidently, the tables were turned, and Horus and this other child, who we can presume is Anri from the fact that, again, Horus and Anri are constantly joined at the hip, were able to escape after turning the tables on the executioner, you know, ironically, ironically him getting beheaded instead of beheading, and then Horus takes the armor, puts it on, and then sort of runs. Now, it's worth noting that Horus, in terms of the weapons that he uses, does not have these, and I think the same with Anri, they don't have the strength requirement. They don't have as high a strength requirement as the beheader's weapon. I think you would have to two-hand it. So you can kind of get this idea that, yeah, it pretty much fits that the reason why the sword was left behind was because it was just not something they could practically wield. Then there is the added detail of Horus's shield, which, of course, is a shield connected to Drang Lake. Now, where the hell does he get this shield? Now, it's possible he just found it out in the world. Again, we found other Drang Lake items that are, like the Drang Lake shield that Way of White heralds use. That, you know, you can imagine someone just picks up and uses because, you know, now parts of Drang Lake are all over, especially in this part of the world. So, it's reasonable. Could Anri's lineage factor in the Sable Church interest in him/her as their lord's spouse? Possibly. I'll be talking more about Anri in detail, because I kind of just focused, like, briefly on Horus and Anri, this background I'm going over now, but we'll be talking more about Anri especially in, when I get to Londor, because there is a lot to break down about Anri's history, how they end up in Londor, what exactly is their story up until that point, and how things are playing out with the spouse deal. They wanted to send the kids to a nice farm on the countryside. Sneed is being a smarmy little commenter today. I love it. Everyone, DS3 can be pretty disgusting. Miyazaki, do you have something to tell us? Yeah, Dark Souls is a dark fantasy story. Miyazaki makes sure that, you know, it doesn't matter if it's rape, murder, massacre, like prejudice and bigotry. Like he makes sure, you know, he's not going to be PC about it, and that's what we like about these stories. They tell us about the darkness within the human condition. And same with the Asura greatsword left behind, despite Anri getting the armor and easier to wield straight sword. Possibly. The problem is that grave is separate. Now, again, that ties back, though, to the corpse I was talking about. Anri, of course, wears a Astoran knight armor. Where did she get that? Again, maybe she just happened to find it out in the world, but with all the Astoran stuff, and all the Astorans that we see buried, Astoran knights, I should say, buried in the cathedral, it makes sense that the corpse, which is a corpse that was dug up, and was fully dug up, had its full armor set looted by Anri, much like how Horus took the Executioner's armor. So they both have some protection when they're fleeing out into the wilderness away from the cathedral before the bishops are wise to what happened. Now again, as we're talking about Horus's shield, maybe it came just from the fact that it's out in the world, or maybe, considering it's a very unique weapon, again, it has that rare Gesteel that we, again, associate with the armor of the Drang Knights. It's we have to consider the serious possibility, and I think this is more likely than not, that one of the more honorable Drang Knights, again, not one of the traitors who eventually betrayed the Brethren in order to side with Aldrich, one of them was like, you know, I think it's pretty shit that we're killing kids. And, like, just one of them would go out and try to stop the Executioner, get in tussle, maybe help Horus and Anri with the deed, if not just do it himself. But in the end, the idea is like, okay, kids, I can't really leave my post. I have a duty as a Merc Knight to stay behind per Sulyvahn's orders in order to deal with the stuff at the cathedral now that Aldrich is gone. So, like, hey, here, take my shield. I'm not going to use it anyway because our mercenary order is all about two-handing weapons anyway. We just keep the paraphernalia. So, like, you'll make more use of this than me. And then they go run off, and then, as we know, they eventually become undead for reasons, again, we'll discuss as we go further with Londor, and eventually become allegedly unkindled and join us in our mission. So, again, it's a nice, again, Dark Souls 3 has, like, some of the best vignettes, so. The Drang Lake Knight got thrown into Aldrich's trough for that. Yeah! Yeah, that's the... When you're an upstanding, honorable guy in the world of Dark Souls, yeah, there are no happy endings. Are we the baddies? Yes, there was a are we the baddies moment. Anyway, so that's a lot of prep. I hope a lot of you guys were able to come in as you listen to me rant and everything. We talked about, yeah, we did the soul stuff with Ludlith last time. I did my level ups off screen. Let's just double check. Do I have any bones? Yes, I do. Oh, I gotta burn those then. And I don't have anything for the flask, so yeah, we're pretty good. Let's just switch out my pyromancy because we're gonna need that. What is my man? Reinforce. We need more chunks. Yeah, get pyromancy tome. We don't have to worry about that. Now we know we just need to worry about... Okay, so we killed Wolnir and Old Demon King. So we can kill one more boss and not have to worry about Orbeck getting all pissy on us, so... Let us move right along. Anything else I might be forgetting from our last playthrough? Only thing I want to mention is, of course, there's also, Anri, of course, leaves a prism stone behind where we last saw her in the catacombs. Of course, the point being is that before she knew that Horus was dead, she wanted to leave that just in case Horus, you know, they missed each other, and then Horus would find her, and yada, yada, yada. Oop. Gosh, I'm burping a lot today. I haven't eaten. Why? Sorry, guys. How rude. Now... Irithyll. As we can already see, there is a Rosaria Maggot Man down there. I mentioned earlier the idea that Rosaria is a daughter of Guinevere. And I will be clarifying that position as we continue forward, as well as how that connects to this Maggot Man coming all the way over from the Cathedral and crawling to Irithyll. And as we can see, apparently failing to go in because, well, those ain't women's bodies. Those are some terrifying monstrosities in the wildlife. Now, when we were back at Lothric, and I think we could even see it from the Cathedral of the Deep, there was a river that was flowing around this way that leads into Irithyll. Unfortunately, this river is not visible from Irithyll itself. We only get this stream going through the area. We don't see anything it connects to. I guess you can argue that it's supposed to be running underground through the rocks to here, though it's a bit weird regardless. I get the impression, though, that they just didn't want to make, like, a waterfall or something, and, like, or potentially create an area where you could easily climb and then, like, get out of the area or something. Now, besides the fact that there's Anor Londo, like, right there, visible in the distance, because, again, Dark Souls 3 tries to keep you focused on constantly looking ahead, never look up, down, right, left, or behind. Mostly to hide the mistakes in their geometry and stuff, but sometimes just to make spoilers more subtle. But the point being is that even if you missed Anor Londo, if you pay close attention, you may notice this symbol, which has been used since Dark Souls 1 in Anor Londo architecture. I'm pretty sure this is a generic stock image, though, because I think I remember seeing this or like a similar graphic used in Fire Emblem Three Houses. But the point being is that you can see the image of a blossoming flower within a sun. And again, flower is often used as a symbol for the sun, and of course the sun is often used as a symbol for Anor Londo, the royal family, Gwyn, as King of the Sun's Light, or Lord of Sunlight, etc. So, all of it's coming... Oh! We have another bot. 1 second. Sorry, guys. There we go. Sorry about that. Anor relation to their cosmology at all. George, can you clarify what you mean by that? Is that in connection to Anri, or just kind of figuring out if this is about your last question? Anyway, as I was saying, if you look closely at this graphic, you can clearly see that it is connected to Anor Londo. I'm pretty sure it's a stock image, but it does seem to be used for that specific purpose, which is why they brought it back in. It's one of the few images from Dark Souls 1's Anor Londo brought back to Dark Souls 3. In relation to the Deep, as in relation to the Drang Lake Knights getting thrown into the trough and all that. Again, honestly, just like rephrase the full question, because I'm so confused here and I don't want to give you more headache than necessary. So, as we can see though, it gives a clear delineation that Irithyll is a continuation or an extension or a reconstitution of Anor Londo. Again, parts of Anor Londo were transferred to the New World and became the Hades Tower of Flame. Well, what we see is left of is Hades Tower of Flame, or the Haida civilization. The point being is that Haida was pieces of Anor Londo and some of Gwyndolин's followers, you know, Painting Guardians, Dark Moon Knights, etc., who were basically kind of stranded in the middle of nowhere and basically decided we're going to rebuild civilization. That got all twisted up and became a bunch of different factions and things that we see spread across the New World in Dark Souls 2. Meanwhile, in Dark Souls 1, Gwyndolin, Anor Londo's basically got Gwyndolin and whatever's left having to rebuild. Now, part of that ends up becoming the city that we see. There is some remnants of Anor Londo, of course, but more importantly is that when the drift happens in Dark Souls 3, the city moves, and now has this stream going through it, and this is where we see the final product here, where Irithyll is this snow-covered valley. They turned Gwyn into a bird. Yeah, it's like, our sun god, what was he like? He looked like that bird over there. Even when compared to the more violent Dark adherents, I feel that the Deep cult doesn't even have a nominal interest in uplifting or elevating mankind. Is there anything in-game that talks about that? Well, the Dark has always had struggles with sort of becoming a sort of cohesive moral order just by the nature of, its desire to take and want just sort of leads to selfishness, like we'll just kill each other and, you know, we won't care about long-term goals. So there's always been that struggle with the Dark, but yes, the Deep has an even a bigger problem in that regard, because not only is it, let me double check. I'm not sure if I need to get rid of our dog friend before the summon sign appears here. I think we do. Anyway, there is a problem with the Deep insofar as that its desire on stagnant Dark and the fact that it revolves around Aldrich. Run! Creates this huge cannibalism element, which, again, life-eating has always been a thing with the Dark, but the way that Aldrich sort of embraces it just leads to kind of a lot of unnecessary damage, right? Like, they're not being like, okay, we're gonna do the Dark for purely moral principles. Aldrich certainly believes that because he's a cleric and he's doing these things about creating this Age of Deep Seas and all that, but let's be honest. Aldrich has the benefit of saying, I'm gonna be the one in charge, so of course he's gonna advocate for this age that he wants to lead. He's the one who's gonna get all the goodies. Now, in terms of the cosmology and anything deeper, I don't think there's a significant difference. I think you could theoretically have either a Dark or Deep faction, which were, you know, honorable and wonderful and all that stuff. It would just, they would have to essentially take the Koth approach and have to temper their nature, right? Like, there has to be sort of like, okay, you have this dark nature that wants to, you know, take and steal, and especially when it comes to from life and everything like that, but you have to be able to restrain yourself insofar as being able to do the best for all those like you on the side of the Dark. Now, we had in our first... Yeah, I'd want to go home too if I was stuck between a rock and a hard place. we had our first encounter with one of Sulyvahn's beasts. Now, I think most people understand that these beasts are connected to the Outrider knights that we see back at Lothric. The idea being is that when they go full beast mode, they turn into those monstrosities. If we put them in a vulnerable position, they will just lay on their back and put their hands in prayer, giving the idea that, yes, they were once human. So this is the idea of this is what the black eyes produce, ultimately. Monsters like that. Now, this creature is basically a guard dog here. We would be trapped through this barrier if not for the doll that we received from Royce. Whether or not Anri took the other doll in order to get in here, or got in through the sewers like we can also do down there, we don't know, but it is interesting to note that McDonald left Royce with one doll, and then Aldrich also left his doll behind. It's very clear that they were not coming here just to be like, hey, we're coming back to join Irithyll. No, no, no. There was an inherent opposition to their return trip home. As we saw earlier when we passed by, there is the main road that would lead out of Irithyll and presumably lead to like places like Lothric or the Undead Settlement, or obviously some of the other lands that are outside of these places, you know, in the fringes that we do not get to explore. That road has been clearly blocked. Now we know that, of course, Aldrich and his forces have made it this far, so the impression is that they are, again, they're making sure no one gets out. They're not going to let leave any room for anyone to escape. And yeah, so we're going to move on from there. Also note how the beast comes out of like a dark cloud. I mentioned before about how Vort seems to come out of a portal, you know, with all the little wet fluid and all that stuff that comes with it. And he seems to kind of warp in. So again, we get this idea that these creatures are connected to the dark. Dumb dog. And I just love that sound. Along with that, we get the the impression also, because they use lightning attacks, that they're not fully dark, but there's definitely a dark element into their creation. A good old power union between Sully and Aldi, nothing wrong with that. Yeah, just gotta add some spice to the old reunion. It can't be perfectly amicable, right? Okay, so notice also, again, as soon as we see the main road being blocked, we're given like bad signs that something's wrong here. On this beautiful city, it's not all scenic rainbows here. And as we can also see, there's this statue piece of a cleric, so giving this idea of conflict with the clergy. Again, notice how there is nothing for this base to be here, so the developers really went out of the way to make sure, okay, we really want this here as soon as someone walks in to see. So we're really kind of setting the tone here of what's going forward. As well as this idea of corpses with nameless soldiers. So clearly this city, which should have looked pretty fancy and all that, has not been, has a lot of conflict and fighting recently. We also, of course, notice how the city itself hasn't been that well taken care of. Oop, I'm just burping a lot today. Sorry about that. The grass here is obviously terribly overgrown. It's clearly just ugly. We can even see some houses which have foliage now growing on front of it, which leads to the unfortunate implication that some people aren't living in these homes. So, where have they gone? So again, more warriors to give us the hint. This is also our first look at this fountain with some statues. Statues, of course, of the cleric. Statues of followers prostrated in prayer. And statues of a... Let's go to the other side where the moon is. Statues of a woman with a crown in very thick clothing befitting the weather. But if you pay attention very closely, you notice that she's got those suspicious hair ties. Now, if you are someone who loved the amazing chest ahead, or I guess I should say, who actually was able to have your eyes not glued to the amazing chest ahead, you may recall that these arm ties were worn by Guinevere on her attire. So we're getting the indication that despite being much more, how do I say this, reserved in her dress, this woman is Guinevere, Princess of Sunlight. Which will, of course, give us the idea that Guinevere is present here, which again makes sense, as I said earlier. Rosaria, if Rosaria is a child of Guinevere, and she seems to have been presumably brought, if Guinevere was here or has a presence here, then it would make sense that Rosaria would come to the cathedral from Irithyll by way of Sulyvahn's order. I felt bad vibes when I found the doll at the cathedral and no Aldrich. Yeah, the big plot twist where it's like, oh, we're supposed to do it here, and it's like, oh, he's not. But yeah, now we're picking up that story thread where it's like, okay, we've now made it all the way to Irithyll to where Aldrich is supposed to be, and we're finding that things are not looking good. All the deacons and everyone, bishops, McDonald, etc., are going all the way to over here, and there seems to be war. Now, obviously, a lot of people have always taken I shouldn't say a lot of people. The English community, a lot of consensus was drawn, at least from what I saw way back when, that Aldrich, okay, here we see some timey-wimey ghosts. These are much like the character spirits that we see. The overlapping between worlds. Sometimes when it's not where we're both inside the same time space, it's almost there, so it kind of creates this kind of illusion where we can kind of see people from from different periods in time going about their business, so it's like we almost get a view into the past. Though, again, this is very rarely done outside of online play, unfortunately. Which is kind of weird, because, like, Sekiro has, like, an entire thing about this. And it's like, imagine if, like, something like that was in Dark Souls. So where was I? Oh, okay, right, so we obviously get this idea in the English community a lot of, oh yeah, Aldrich and Sulyvahn, you know, they work together in order to have Sulyvahn become Pontiff and all that stuff, which then creates terrible timeline issues, because it's the, like, okay, so Aldrich is helping Sulyvahn become Pontiff, but Pontiff Sulyvahn is the one who threw out Aldrich in order for him to go to the cathedral and then become Lord of Cinder, so, like, the timeline doesn't make any sense. And again, it's because of a few localization issues that both in Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3, that the story they're trying to say isn't obvious. And again, the same thing happens with Izalith, right? Some localization problems occur, and people will always look at the text first, again, naturally, and as a result, they will ignore a lot of the environmental storytelling. It'll either be superfluous, or maybe it's a mistake or something, and it leads to a lot of confusion because, again, it's like, well, they don't know. See that little pot that is usually supposed to have fire here, but now it's missing. Now we hear the woman speaking in tongues here is Doris. Now it looks like there was a bit more to her character in cut ideas of the game, where you would get weaker versions of her spells. The idea being that she was, the idea of singling her out as someone who increasingly goes insane as she dives deeper and deeper into the deep. But as we can see here, she is imprisoned. So again, there's this idea there's a conflict between the forces of the cathedral and Sulyvahn, though we figure out it's much more nuanced. But again, it's not a case of, oh yeah, Aldrich and Sulyvahn were pals, and then they, and now there's problems. It's like, no, no, no. There were problems from the very moment that they made contact again. Our first look at the Pontiff Knights. They are essentially the SS of our good, pure Sulyvahn. Their entire shtick is to watch for any problems that might be happening in Irithyll, and then deal with those problems, if necessary, with their blades. Unfortunately, as we can see, they are dead. By their corpse-like appearance, they are not hollows, like in other cases. Yeah, not getting a good look at them here. So there is, and they're called in item descriptions, quote-unquote, ghosts, so there does seem to be this idea that necromancy has been done to revive them. You may also notice, of course, that their weapons have been eaten into by insects. Haha, butthole joke. Yeah. Let's get over it. The way Pontiff and Aldrich's underlings are segregated supports them being opposed. Exactly. Like, again, it's something that it's just how it is. It's how it's existing in the world. Okay, yeah. The idea, of course, with the Pontiff Knights being revived again shows that there's lots of damage, and then you have this idea of being eaten away by insects. Well, we know that there are certain things that gnaw on anything and try to make it bleed or tear it apart and that like, and that's, of course, the Cathedral Evangelist's spells, which, again, the conflict is emphasized by the fact that that evangelist is locked up in essentially a jail cell, though for some reason she can open the door from her side, but we can open it from hers. Make it make sense, Miyazaki. While the Pontiff Knights, of course, are the zombies walking around as guards again. And every time they aren't, there is an obvious opposition. Pontiff Beast killing the Covenant leader, Doris. Yes, exactly. The more and more you go through this area, the more you see it. Now, again, we come to another sort of plaza with these Irithel slaves. Much like the giant slaves, they are clearly not being well taken care of. They're emaciated. They also, of course, have connections to dark magic with the humanity hair and eyes they got going for them. And, of course, we also see them using magical claymores, though if we have them drop the claymores are just ordinary weapons. Again, I do not put much stock into this. I assume this is just for gameplay purposes, that they don't want to have automatically enchanted weapons freely given through a bunch of basic enemies. So they just make them regular claymores. Oh, darn. Again, notice how the fountain here has, again, destroyed lamps and things like that, reinforcing this idea that lots of damage is happening. But we can see that the lack of care to the architecture goes way back before that, because there's all this overgrowth that is clearly taken over. Nameless soldier, again, more idea of people are fighting and dying. And a budding green blossom. Again, we see green blossoms in the far forest. Now that we're hitting the valley and it's getting colder, the water here is colder, and thus we start seeing these special weeds show up. To be fair, it looks more like a buff. Yeah, it could be something to that effect as well, but we don't really see it used as a buff in that say, or we don't see them buff it. So again, I just treat it as like, okay, it's like an infusion or some type of enchantment. Ryan Blue Moss Clumps. Again, I talked earlier about the idea of a crab. We see, of course, the crabs in Smoldering Lake, the crabs in Faron Woods. The idea that they're native to this area and can get around into Karthus makes sense. So I guess we have that explanation for why there's a crab inside a skeleton bowl. But again, I would not take it too seriously. It's clearly done in good fun, regardless of lore implications. Now, this enemy here are the Flame Witches. Perhaps the first time we get to see witches using fire sorcery in a very long time, considering that I think the Witches' Island are the only other ones confirmed to have done something like that. Well, I guess if you count the quote-unquote fire sorcerers in Dark Souls 2, but again, that's like completely like shifting the ball game. These witches are, of course, obsessed with the profane flame. The idea being is that they are supposed to be paladins or holy knights who have become so entranced by the flame that Sulyvahn brought to them that they are essentially fully swayed to his side and act as leaders in the field. Like, I guess we should say field captains for the Pontiff Knights. Though, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are precisely always in charge of the hierarchy, as we will see in the future. Notice also how these knights pull humanity out of their mouths. There are two ways to interpret this, of course. There is the one is that this is part of like Sulyvahn and dark magic that we'll see associated with him more and more, like with the slaves. You could also interpret this as I kind of settle on the idea of being it's proof of course, deep souls and the like coming in, and especially because these souls are, I think, a little bit more purpley in color. uh, attacking, being like infesting inside of these knights, and then they're like kind of like pulling them out now that they're like zombies and stuff, and trying to throwing them as an attack. Again, interpret it however you will. Either way, it gives us the idea that there's been conflict here, and there is lots of dark happening here on both sides. Now we go through this illusionary thing to see the, I guess you can kind of say it, the surveillance area for this little prison they got. There's our girl. Alright, Doris, let's put you out of your misery. Now, fun fact, Doris is named after, I think, I can't remember if it's a relative or if it's like a dryad or a spirit of some sort related to a god of the sea, and I believe Greek mythology. So, again, the deep and the association with the deep sea is a very apt association. Now, we see a bunch of these trees here that don't have leaves around Irithyll. And as we may recall earlier, we received a Saint Tree Bell Vine from just a fallen branch of a broken stump of what was presumably a Saint Tree. And here we find a corpse with a witch tree under this tree. Now the tree isn't destroyed, and there's a corpse here. So it's possible that it's just coincidence. But there is this notion that someone took care of the tree. There we go. That this idea that someone brought up grew it in order to make these sort of sorcery catalysts and things like that. And that, of course, the point being is that it's customary in the far north, the idea that Drang Lake, Dark Souls 2 setting, the New World, is all the way far north of Lothric. Meanwhile, Lordran would thereby be somewhere probably much further south, because again, both Drang Lake and Lordran have about the same they get the same amount of influence from the Far East. So there's this idea of, okay, they gotta be, like, basically, they're somewhere along the vertical vertex. So these are quite possibly witch trees. Now, we saw witch trees in Dark Souls 2 when they were, like, alive and moving and doing, like, their own thing and becoming, like, their own sorcerers. And they were similarly a sort of brighter, almost white color with like no leaves and stuff like that. So again, this might be the idea of having a bunch of magic trees planted. Now, not these, around. Which again makes sense because this is a country which is associated with sorcery due to both Sulyvahn and, of course, the Dark Moon. And thereby Gwyndolin. Which, of course, Miyazaki makes sure to set the scene by having us see a crescent moon. I think it's a waning moon, too, so, again, a dark moon. What do we see from here? Now, you may notice this big building over here. This is Gwyndolin's mansion with the blue roof. Notice how it is on the outskirts of the city architecture. It's also terrible real estate because the windows literally clip into the floor, into the floor. Oh god, FromSoft. But yeah, you can see bits and pieces over there and here, and yeah. The point being, of course, is that it's the biggest mansion I think we see in the I think it's the biggest building outside of like the cathedral or the churches or something. And clearly shows the importance of the individual who lives here, but also the fact that he's not putting himself front and center up top. He's kind of living out there, close to the edges where the quote-unquote common people live. Though they're not really common, as we learn. They're a bunch of nobles. Again, more overgrowth. This is perhaps one of the most important areas in terms of environmental storytelling, because it is essentially showing us what the symbols for Irithyll are, or were, in some cases. Have you already talked about your theory about the name Irithyll? No, we'll actually get to that shortly. As we can see here, there are a bunch of followers, so it sort of gives this impression that, okay, there's something very holy up ahead as we progress forward. We, of course, see a procession of a Flame Witch with other Pontiff Knights back there as we get. But you may recall that there is a platform there that seems to have nothing on it, which is very strange. It just seems to be this random elevated platform ahead, right before the cathedral. That's odd. That we'll get to that later, because it's important. Large Titanite Shard. Now, we'll come back to here later, as I want to focus on getting the bonfire. You know, we'll grab that stuff there later when we come in. Here we have the Church of Yorshka. This church has clearly seen better days. Much like some of the houses we were talking about earlier, there is a bunch of overgrowth starting to seep into the building. And clearly it has just not, it's the chairs and everything, it's just not been taken care of. Now, there aren't any pews or anything, so there is this idea that it wasn't used primarily for worship. Instead, it seems to be more of a meeting place, which I'm going to jot that down to add to my Irithyll analysis. Another benefit of doing these streams is helping me, again, every playthrough you go through Dark Souls, you know something new that you didn't pick up on before. Because, again, this stuff is information overload. And even Miyazaki understands that it's incredibly difficult to understand his stories in the first sitting, because there's just so much information to constantly be taking care of and remembering. Anyway, point being is that it seems like this church was not necessarily used as a traditional church in our world would. It's being used more as a meeting place. We also have this block here that looks more like a coffin than an altar. There is, of course, the added ceremony given with these candelabras. Actually, are these called candelabras? I think they are. Whatever, we'll just call them lamps. Anyway. And then there's this body which decides it wants to kind of keel over and kneel in reverence to this box. And as proof of a concord kept, indicating it is a Dark Moon Knight who has fulfilled his duty, or her duty, slaying sinners, the enemies of the gods. Which would make sense with her being the captain, if I recall correctly, of the Blades of the Dark Moon. Yes, with Yorshka herself, of course. So, yeah, there is this idea that this building was probably used less for worship and more for meeting. Again, the main worship building would be the cathedral there. That's right next door. This church exists for other reasons related to, of course, Yorshka. Now, let's first start with...
Oh, I thought it might be you. Good to see you. I never managed to find Horus.
Darn.
But my duty must be done, even alone. As an unkindled Lord Seeker. For the children I knew, bless their souls. We all have our reasons, don't we?
Now again, Anri makes mention now of the children. Now, I guess the best way to put it is that we talked earlier, of course, about the idea that Horus and presumably Anri, his erstwhile partner in crime, have escaped Aldrich after being given birth to by Rosaria in this most unholy of unions. The question, of course, is what happened to all the other kids? Well, all the other kids were presumably eaten by Aldrich, which is why Anri has this huge vendetta. As she reveals here, it's more obvious in the Japanese script. This isn't about unkindled or being a Lord Seeker or I guess King Seeker if you want to use the Frank translation from Dark Souls 1. But anyway, the point being is that this isn't anything about the First Flame. This is about her, and well, but with Horus too, and getting their, avenging those that were their brothers and sisters killed by, Aldrich. Now, they never use the term brother and sister or anything like that, among these, either Horus or Anri or, of course, the children. But again, we have to consider the circumstances. They were being locked up, essentially, and raised in isolation, probably barely educated, considering they're not feral children, so, like, they were given, like, the most minimal of, necessities in order to grow up, and then eventually fed as food. there are no familial bonds to be had in that hell. And now that they have a chance, they want to make sure that they can avenge those souls. I hate my brain. I keep thinking Yorshka over and over. Yorshka! Now, as we'll find later, Yorshka makes reference to a lift that no longer exists, if I recall correctly. So the idea being, this area would be where a lift was. Now, obviously, you don't see any remnant or architecture. The way this is designed, it doesn't make much sense for there to be a lift. But it is confirmed in the game files there were plans for a lift being there. And as we know from Miyazaki, he loves being meta and including references to stuff that, oh yeah, this was in the game, but then it was removed or it was changed, and then we're going to reflect that in the lore. So yeah, this is the idea of like, okay, there was a lift here, but it was essentially removed in order to keep anyone from going to the top of the tower through this church. We also have this, again, going back to this idea of a Dark Moon Knight kneeling here. I have made my case that this is a coffin, or at least a ceremonial coffin, intended to honor Yorshka. And then we sort of have a moment of Sulyvahn being like here, oh, it's so awful what happened and that she is dead. I'm not dead. I can still hear her voice sometimes. And like, you know, the idea being is that he's creating this idea of like, he made the church honor her, because again, this is her church, so of course she would be buried here. And she'd be the principal figure buried here for everyone to come here and honor. But this is just him basically doing the bare necessities to pretend that he is not involved in any way whatsoever with Yorshka's quote-unquote death. We also see here how the slaves have just sort of... Oh, okay, no, it's at the other end. But we can see how these slaves have casually dumped statues here. That we see, of course, over there by the cathedral during that plaza. But one of these is not like the others. We have someone who's using an Ulasilian chameleon spell. Now, I've made a case of how this woman is possibly Hazel's mother, or at very least another Xanthos scholar who ended up for whatever reason, maybe because she was hollowing, going over to Londor and now serves Yuria and company. But the idea, of course, would be that she did learn Dusk's chameleon spell beforehand, so she's able to mimic the statues here in order to hide. And of course, the implication being, if we don't kill her, she will subvert Anri's quest to Aldrich in order to do the Lord of Hollows questline. So, neat. By the way, we are going to do that, because I'm sorry, Anri, I will get vengeance for you. Don't worry, my future wife. I will do it. We have to take all agency away from you, my princess. As we can see here, more stuff that seems to have been casually dumped here as the overgrowth is starting to set in. Again, another proof that this was a meeting area for Dark Moon Knights is the roster for the knights that is being kept here. So there is this idea that when Yorshka was made captain, this was the place where Dark Moon Knights were going to handle everything before Sulyvahn took over. Let us now... Oh, no, you know what? Let's continue. Let's now that we have the bonfire, we can continue this way. We're almost at a level up, too, so if we do well, we can maximize our efficiency. Again, more weary warriors and soldiers being found here. As we can see, a flame witch is off to the side to ruin our day if we just went out the front door and focused on the guys in front. Hey, girl. Oh. Oh. You were the distraction, I see. I was bamboozled. Ow. Thanks for the free Estus. I was about to run out. We got slaves behind this gate, but obviously the idea being is that you can go to the cathedral from the plaza. Again, just makes natural sense considering how the city's layout is constructed. Another knight coming from behind. Come this way. Come on. Come on, buddy. Actually, let's get a good look at some of your attacks. Come on. Now, these knights have a disabled attack that would buff their weapon with dark. Again, getting more connection to Sulyvahn. For one reason or another, probably gameplay related, but could also be justified that they don't want to show off their hand that they are using dark magic in this city, which is ostensibly holy and related to the gods. Ooh. You done? Not gonna do anything? Come on. Ah, there. Come on! Alright, no cold magic attacks. Oh, now you do it! Ay, ay, ay! But as you can see, they can use cold magic in order to increase their weapon's range as well as add magic damage and the like. Now, here we have a lightning gem. The fact this seems to be classic Miyazaki's way of trying to indicate what was once here by having a corpse here to give us association. So, okay, you can see all the light here, which makes this area much more brighter and warmer in terms of colors compared to the rest of Irithyll. You can see it also here on the sides, where there was clearly statues that were supposed to be placed on these pedestals that have now been removed and instead replaced by covering, kind of like sloppily covering them up with these statues of squires. Now, these squires, much like the silver dolls, are holding the knights, the silver knight straight swords. So again, giving this idea of duty, service to the gods, doing your part to kind of promote subservience instead of whatever this figure here was reminding them of. We can also see as we progress, you have one cleric with the bowl of flame in the left hand, but on the church's right side, and on the left side is the one with the crook, representing ecclesiastical authority, as well as could be sorcery and things like that nature if you want to interpret it as a sorcerer's staff. But again, gives us this sense of the idea that up ahead we have someone who in this cathedral. There's the representations of the Gloria Fire and ecclesiastical authority. Illusory wall here. Illusory wall with a magic clutch ring here. Now it looks like someone died horribly, hiding behind here. So, and then someone seemed to, for whatever reason, covered it up. Interesting to think about. I'm not entirely sure how should I interpret this, because again, clutch rings have been associated with Londor to some extent, but of course they were previously associated with Velka in Dark Souls 2, and there is this idea that magic just generally would be associated with, of course, Sulyvahn. So is this a spy from Londor / Velka that was trying to hide? If so, why is he dead as if someone killed him and then put up the illusory wall? Again, there's a little bit here that still investigating, but wanted to share that so we can get a little idea here. Yeah, nothing else. We just have to get the corpse up there, which again I will talk more about the figure as we go here. But again, we get the idea that clearly there's a lot of propaganda going on here, both for original Irithyll as well as being recontextualized for present-day Irithyll under Sulyvahn. Now, where shall we go from here? Yeah, let's go through the Church of Yorshka now. It's time to press onward. Yeah. If nothing else, I need the Estus. Now we can break a soul. I don't think this soul's enough though, right? Nope. Nope. Yeah, we gotta kill a few slaves first. Now, we see out back behind the church, or I guess beside it, depending on how you want to interpret it. But anyway, out back of the church, there is a graveyard. Though, obviously, not getting given all the attention it deserves much either. This graveyard seems to have been here for quite a while, as we do find corpses. They are not half buried or anything, but they do seem to make sense with what we've seen previously of... Oh, talk about that in a second. There we go. Of souls of deserted corpses being found in graveyards, or in this case, fading souls, because when those deserted corpses are left for a very, very long time, as we see in the Cemetery of Ash, they become fading souls. Because again, when you're dead, you're not gaining new souls through sustenance or killing or anything like that in order to kind of continue building up your power of disparity. And I think there's another one here, if I recall. Now, this graveyard is implied thus to be fairly old and had been around for a decent while, much like the Cemetery of Ash. And again, we don't really see a proper graveyard for Irithyll as a city, so I'm not entirely sure if this is supposed to be the proper graveyard, but at the very least it seems to be a graveyard for those who are associated with Yorshka. Now, we can see here a particularly large grave with a Corvian paying respects to it. The implication, of course, being you're a strong Corvian, too. Ill. Anyway, the fact that this grave is so much larger compared to the others suggests it is a figure who is also equally as large in one form or another. We also know that this, in relative to Anor Londo, the Church of Yorshka is placed where the Ariamis painting gallery used to be. You can also see a early glimpse at a statue of Gwyndolin up there. But again, we'll talk about more of that later. So the implication would be with this Corvian, a crowman, who again, the crowmen were very reverential to Priscilla in Dark Souls 1. And of course, she is the original undesirable, the detested, undesirable outcast, whom the Corvian storytellers' legends are all modeled on for them to follow. We also, of course, know that, see that Priscilla, Yorshka, is a half-dragon crossbreed, or I guess she'd be more of a quarter dragon, but you get my drift. Point is that she is, it would make sense then for the Church of Yorshka to have Priscilla here if Priscilla was Yorshka's mother. And again, we'll talk more about that as we get to Yorshka. Undead Bone Shard, Homeward Bone. Again, this idea of returning home, because again, there's this idea of, oh, I want to go back to the going back to the painting world or something to that effect, right? Someone's collected a lot of Homeward Bones and they're like, I just want to go back to the place where I belong. Now, I'm not someone who is very knowledgeable when it comes to flowers, either on the Japanese flower meanings or Western flower meanings. So, if someone's able to identify all the flowers in Dark Souls 3 and hell, any of the games, I would really appreciate it, because you never know if there's some meaning to certain flowers being in certain places. But again, yeah, we see the idea that on the spot where the Ariamis painting gallery was, there is this church to Yorshka with a grave to Priscilla, which of course would tell us that Priscilla is dead at this point, though not without leaving a legacy behind. Aren't those just lavenders? Again, I don't know flowers. I was taking some notes on the use of lilies in Elden Ring, so I might take a look at the Souls games. I would really appreciate that, Teen Sith, if you do. But again, don't feel like obligated to. As we can see with the slaves, both at the graveyard and here, at a distance they are invisible, and they have this more humanity-like appearance thanks to their eyes and their little heads spattering. But again, this is to show you the kind of magic that Sulyvahn is doing is of the dark variety, though not exclusive to that. As we can see, he can do necromancy. Again, another example of said necromancy, speaking of which, are these dogs. Now, these dogs seem to take some actual dogs, combine them with some human heads, feel bad for the people that were part of that experiment, and perform this kind of necromancy. They have the... I think they are weak to blessed weapons, so like that might just again show that they are in fact truly, you know, among the dead, though it may also relate to the idea that dark magic is involved in this creation. It's always hard to say when... because again, there's, you know, there's blessed and there's lightning, and like, again, the delineations start getting a little vague. Oh, darn. I forgot to put on the pyromancy. Your animations were not made for this alleyway, sir. Kukri. Again, associated with thieves. My man! Okay, the dogs are the real ghosts of Irithyll. They just fucking phase through the... phase through the walls. So we have Kukri on this corpse, which again makes us think of thieves, because again, after Karthus' fall, thieves came to adopt these throwing knives that were presumably spread around what was left of the Empire. And then we also, of course, find a rusted gold coin. Of course, a coin is something that a thief would steal. So the idea is that this slave with some dog that leading some of these dogs, as we'll see more later, basically sicks them on these thieves in Irithyll, and they are munching on the corpse when we come by. Redgrave made a video specifically on the flowers in BB, FYI. Yeah, I'll have to take a look at that eventually when I like finish up a lot of my my Bloodborne stuff, and I'm like, okay, let me look at see if there's anything additional that the flowers might tell us. It might be cool to take a look at. Would you guys be interested in me doing like live reactions to different content creators' videos and stuff? Because I want to do like videos, of course, of my own content and things, but that of course takes time with the scripting and everything. Because obviously my stuff is long. And rewriting it all for a video script takes even more time. So I'm doing these live streams now, but it might be interesting if I also like do maybe like some kind of live reactions, or not necessarily live reactions, because I'd want to make sure I got all my data in order, but sort of reactions to different content creators, maybe popular bad theories, good theories, etc. Just to kind of like see what kind of like give my perspective on what they get wrong, what they get right, maybe what I can add or to whatever point they're making, like, you know, kind of just like add my 2 cents. Would that be interesting? I don't know. It's just kind of throwing that out there. Rusted gold bothers me a lot. Well, yeah. I don't blame you. It's got a gold coin and you let it rust, like, kind of awkward. Oh. Now, we here find these slaves' living arrangements. I just published my Radon essay, so I would love something to force me to take a break from thinking about it. Well, that's cool. I could like look at... I could also do like essays and stuff. Is it like a video essay or is it like a written thing? Because I can also do like written stuff maybe if you guys want. Blue bug pellets. Okay. So, the idea being here is that the Irithyll slaves are, living down in this dark... I think he fell out of the world. This dank, dark, wine cellar, as we can see here. Or if not a wine cellar, at least a storage facility of some sort. Again, emphasizing the idea that they are not being treated well. They are vomiting up this material that has, does magic damage, as we can see from the blue fiery effect. It's written. Hopefully I can convert it to video format one day. Okay, well then if I get around to it, I'll do with the video or the written, whichever one. I would love to... I want to go through my playthrough of Elden Ring first, though, so we might be pushing something like that back to, like, next year or something. Because I do want to finish my playthrough of Elden Ring that I, unfortunately, didn't get too far in relative to the entire game, the massive game. So we'll probably do a live stream like that for this first, and then I'll... Depending on how many problems I have with Elden Ring's localization, which, again, from what I've seen of the script, and I've looked at most of it, it's not that bad. So we'll see. We'll see how that plays out. Now these slaves have their legs cut at the knees. It's hard to tell if that's because they broke or they got infected with something or what have you, but the point is obviously, again, very bad treatment. They're forced to crawl around, and most of them are found here, so you get the sense that these are truly invalids who basically aren't able to really do the same amount of work as the other slaves. And they're just kind of hiding out here, hoping their masters don't notice. We, of course, find these blue bug pellets, which the slaves make in order to apparently deal with abuse from sorcerers. So you can imagine if MacDonald's a sorcerer, if Aldrich, as we'll later see, is a sorcerer, if Sulyvahn's a sorcerer and all that, it makes sense that the clergy and other people in status that are commanding these slaves, obviously the Pontiff Knights also use sorcery, these are, that they are essentially trying to defend from these harsh taskmasters. Where are you? There you go. I remember you. Gosh, I wish I bought Cast Light from Seal. That would be really nice right now. Did Anor Londo use human slaves before Sulyvahn? Not that we know about. We don't see any human slaves in Dark Souls 1, and there's no indication of them from items or lore or anything like that. What we know about Anor Londo, again, Abyssal Archive, we'll talk about this in more detail, is the notion of the idea that Anor Londo was open for trade for a time, and humans were able to come in regularly, right? That's how the giant blacksmith of Anor Londo is able to know about bolts, which are apparently crossbows are a human invention, because again, they are the industrious species, whereas the gods sort of rest on their laurels with the traditional great bows and arrows and all that. The idea is that the giant blacksmith knows about the crossbows, and, well, he doesn't know about crossbows, he knows about bolts, and that's a lore discussion for Abyssal Archive to tackle, because of the idea that a human had basically come to Anor Londo and made a request for it. He's like, hey, here's a bolt, I'd like you, if you can make one of those for me with, like, that cool lightning power you got, like, etc., and the idea is that, okay, so the gods were allowing humans in for trade, and of course we see many humans who become priests to gods. So if you consider, like, being essentially, like, becoming a man of the cloth to serve a specific deity as a slave, I guess, but again, I don't think that would really count. Talk about the Irithilian race / preset in the character creation. Oh, yes, that's an important thing to point out. So, Irithilian isn't really Irithilian. It's it's like a sign or something of Irithil. So the idea of, like, okay, this is a mark of someone from quote-unquote Irithil. Now we know that the Boreal Valley for sure and Irithil are the same place. It's important to note that there's this idea that you have features and traces of the god. Oh, you have traces of the gods in your genetics, your facial features, and the idea being is that Irithil is gathering up the blood of the gods, all their descendants that they've apparently had with humans. So the gods in Dark Souls 1, again, Abyssal Archive will cover this in more detail, but after the gods leave Anor Londo in Dark Souls 1 to join Lloyd in the world of man, they're obviously kind of just hanging around, and eventually some of them are going to get giggity with a human servant or two. And as a result of that, we get... no more of these guys, we should be safe. As a result of that, eventually, you know, they have children, and then they have children, and etc., etc., where eventually you have these descendants who may not even necessarily know that they are related to gods somewhere in their family tree. They're just, you know, like the random peasant in Village A. And then suddenly, up comes some people from the Boreal Valley, and they come walking in being like, hey, we've heard reports that, you know, you're related to the gods. Well, it looks like it. You know what? We're gonna take you over to Irithil because, you know, you get to become a noble. Because you have divine blood, so that sacrality should be acknowledged for the as the noble blood it is, and then from there they're able to what's the word? From there they're able to basically kind of live out in quote unquote luxury as members of the Irithilian theocracy. Now, the problem with this is that as the Irithilian face tells us, this is an ominous sign, because Well, Sulyvahn's now in charge, and we see how things are with Sulyvahn in charge. So yeah, when people are hearing, oh, hey, the Boreal Valley, hey, you look like you got the face of the gods, it's like, oh shit, the Boreal Valley might come by. Oh boy, don't take me, no, no! Let's see how this is. Now there's gonna be a screamer soon. I can't believe that hit. That's unfortunate timing on the backstab's part. You done? Here we see even the slaves can cast sorcery with these little wands. So clearly it's not just that they're being abused by magic, they're also being taught magic, much like what we saw earlier with the claymores, in order to use against, here we go, blood gem, against the foes as they act as like soldiers guarding with the Pontiff Knights. Now, besides the blue bug pellets they're making to defend against such magical abuse, we also see apparently they have blood gems to slurp up. One, it has an ominous implication for how these blood gems are being made in this area, but it also gives the idea that the slaves are so desperate for sustenance they will just slurp up the blood from these rocks. Notice here how we have a figure who seems to have died to one of these sewage centipedes. I don't recall what the English... Moving right along. I don't recall what the English name for these enemies are. But the idea is, of course, that they inhabit, quote-unquote, filthy water or sewage. The idea being, of course, that we'll find them in sewer areas going forward. They sort of, much like the crabs, they try to gather up all the detritus and all that waste that goes through, as well as hunting by sort of waiting here. By pretending to be dead, or actually being dead. Now we find a ring of sacrifice here on this guy. Now we do find ring of sacrifices around, so it's not always clear how relevant it is. But here I have reason to believe that this was someone who was trying to infiltrate Irithyll, and we'll see that more as we head into Irithyll Dungeon. I've seen them called sewer centipedes. Okay, the localization's pretty on point. Yeah, sewage, sewer, that both works. Where is our friend? I'm doing Irithyll without my pyromancy, and I hate it. I need to remember to put it back on when we hit the bonfire. Actually, wait. Is fire even useful in the dungeon? I actually don't recall. Large soul of a nameless soldier. Hey, buddy. Come on. Come on, get out of the water. I should have, There's the lightning. Oh. Get out of your line of fire. I also gotta burn those, ah, dang it, the second attack. And we get the Pontiff's right eye to confirm that they are, in fact, the results of, they are the end, I should say, they are the end product of the Outrider Knights. Which, again, if we, as we established earlier, Sulyvahn went to war with Izalith, they're not just the Drang Knights. He would also, of course, send some Outrider Knights for people that he doesn't care if they end up coming back as beasts. Great heal, telling us that this maggot was a high-ranking clergyman once upon a time. Unfortunately, he seems to have been a victim of these sewage centipedes. or I guess we'll call them sewer centipedes since the localization's so on point. As we can see, they vomit up some of that filth that they try to extract nutrients from. I guess we should thank them for keeping this water relatively clean. Nature. Moving right along. Now over here we see that there is another manor outside the normal city limits. It's not here on this fancy platform. It's sort of just left here right at the end of where the river is being redirected into the city sewer line. More green blossoms, because again, makes sense, waterfronts. Green blossoms. So this was, of course, used to formally disconnect the areas. But this here, this is a very big manor. Almost as big, or about as big, as Gwyndolins, which is right over there behind it. So, that being the case, whose does this belong to? Clearly, there's someone who was given a pretty big fancy manor, but they weren't given the same respect as all the other nobles living up in the high life over there. And at the same time, they were still given a close proximity to Gwyndolin, so is it someone that Gwyndolin favored? Curious, curious. You're sending me mixed messages here, Miyazaki. Now we have our relay point to the sewers as well as through here. As we can see, this manor has long since been cleared out of anything useful. It's now just got basic supplies and stuff as slaves guard the place. Trying to trick me. Oh. Oh. You know what? We're gonna go back because I need to replace that. My pyromancy! Ree! He just disappeared. Alright. Now, let us see. Attune. Right, I need 2 slots for this. We're gonna have to start going for, attunement. Oh, only 2, that's good. Oh, that was not the plan. Yeah, snarl all you want, you're still dead. Now let's get our Flame Witch out of the way here. So a lot of guards are being put for what is allegedly an abandoned manor. Now, this deserted manor is referred to in the Japanese as specifically, of course, being highlighted as on the outskirts. So it is seemingly an important detail to consider. And it is curious because this manor serves as our way to get to the dungeon. Now, you might say, why would anyone have their real estate go right into the dungeon? Well, we're probably going to talk about that next time. Or actually, no, we might be able to at least take dip our toes in. There we go. To this. Let's see. Again, you can see up there. There's the staircase that would have once led down to Smoldering Lake. Now, the game doesn't let us actually see Smoldering Lake from here. There's Alva. Now, generally speaking, Dark Souls 3 does not let you see characters alive. There's Patches, which is basically Miyazaki's calling card. He's more of a... yeah, he's a calling card more than a character. And then there's, of course, Andre, who's there for the obligatory blacksmith fan service. But most other characters we find are either they've left the scene entirely, or they've died, or they are, as in this case, dark spirits. So we never really technically meet them in the flesh, so to speak. I was hoping that our Alva friend with his AI would dodge roll himself off the cliff, but I guess that's not for this playthrough. Now, Alva was a character we never even met in Dark Souls 2. Rather, he was someone spoken about in relation to Zullie the Witch. The idea being that there is the storyline about him apparently trying to save a saint. Zullie was constantly getting in the way of that. In fact, I want to actually write a post, at least for the Dark Souls 2 part of this story, in the near future, because it seems to be that the devs in Dark Souls 2 decided to have their own little kind of like Wile E. Coyote comedy of errors story with Zullie. But it does end on a heartwarming note where the witch sort of ends up, well, I guess Alva ends up very sad and depressed because he fails in his mission, but Zullie basically has a change of heart. She comforts him, and eventually those feelings are in fact returned. As we see here, he is now seeking the quote-unquote spurned again. This is similar to the omen that we see in Elden Ring, as well as, again, the same adjectives being used in relation to the forlorn, the undesirables, the detested, the abominations, the outcasts, etc. The idea being, of course, is that witches like Zullie were completely they were not for this world, according to society. Now we have made our ways to Irithyll Dungeon. We will cover Irithyll Dungeon, though, in the future. So let's head back to Firelink Shrine to dump these souls before I lose them in an embarrassing fashion. Because you all know I would totally do it. Let's also see if 2 level ups can get me... I don't think this will boost my my attunement slots, but we'll see. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna value vitality more now because it's it's been terribly neglected.
May the flames guide thee.
Wonderful. Still over the limit. Whee! I can't wait till we get Havel's +3. Nothing. Wait. No, we haven't beat any bosses yet, so we don't care about you. Remember, Loki. Burn the undead bone shards. Very important. Burn the undead bone shards. If I want to get the ring from him, I have to buy more sorcery, so we gotta do that at some point. I don't really want anything that he's got. So yeah, we'll leave it to that. We don't have a pyromancy tome for you. We don't have the witch yet, so because I haven't decided what I'm gonna do with you, Irina. Irina. Yeah, okay. I think we're good. The only thing we need is to burn those. Yes, yes, yes. I think that's it, but let me double check. Oh no, we have one more. Okay. Now it's done for. Yeah, okay. So, and now we should start leveling up our vitality. No, our vigor. Because vigor is where we are. Now we can probably heal more than we have in health. Yeah, okay. Looks like we're making progress. Soon I shall wear my full set again. What do we want, though? Maybe Andre? No. Okay, yeah. We can just keep going. Oh, we don't need this much Estus against, who we're facing, so.
Just wasn't neat.
Let's allot Estus. Let's do it 2. If I need more than that, I will adjust.
Pretty big, I don't.
Yeah. We're also going to move this here because until I get the up. With my vitality as it is, I'm just not going to have any other weapon. But, you know, I don't want to risk, like, losing my sword and losing out on some souls, so yeah, keep it. Hey. Back to the distant manor. Now we're going to start dealing with some shortcuts. So, as stated earlier, this is Gwyndolин's manor, which will become quite obvious as we continue our journey forward. But first, we see how the river is being used as a sewer line. Feed the water in, waste comes out. This will also be, of course, relevant to that manor in Irithyll dungeon later, but we will focus more on what's up ahead. Lots of these centipedes. Oh. Oh. All this poisonous material. Now, the poison status I haven't talked too much about, but the idea, of course, with poisons, as we see with Faron and as we see here, is that obviously sewage, swamps, these are places with breed a lot of diseases and contaminants, so poison/toxic are used as sort of the catch-all for these types of harmful substances, and that's the way to think about it. A poison is a harmful substance, so pretty much anything you can define as harmful substance can have the poison status used to represent it in-game. As you can see, there's dung pie and stuff, so... This is where we would find Grey Rat, but we will try to save him this run. Which I think we can with patches, right? We don't have to save Sigurd, I don't think. Sigurd, I don't need you, hopefully. Irithyll slaves, ashes. The idea, again, that Irithyll slaves are so desperate for sustenance, they will literally try to dig amongst the sewage and try to find some feces with enough nutrients to satiate them. Very gross. They, of course, bring with them a bunch of poison moss and stuff because, again, they are wading through stuff that could obviously kill them, and they need some moss that will hopefully cure them of their ailments. Now, we do find Sigurd says that he makes Estus soup for us, but we find this soup already here. So you can make a case that the Warrior of Sunlight, who has been we've been sort of shadowing his journey all the way to here, and that he's the one who, or she, makes the soup, even absent Sigurd. But again, it's really hard to say how much of that is gameplay versus lore, because obviously most people if we were keeping up with the quest properly, Sigurd would already be here. Notice how this was, of course, a kitchen area, and now we see, of course, kind of the grab all the stuff, set the tables, get the wash bins, all that stuff for this spot, and then we finally enter the main manor, which, of course, is very fancy compared to the abandoned manor, and clearly probably the fanciest of the buildings we'll see here. We also see, of course, that this Silver Knight is a man of culture and is very tastefully viewing the gorgeous art of Guinevere. Now, this art looks like it's I don't think this is the original art of her from Anor Londo. I believe that portrait is much smaller in her room, but it is clearly fairly old, which gives the idea that when Guinevere, obviously, if Guinevere is in this city, she would presumably live in this mansion. But again, as we will see, it is not her mansion, it is Gwyndolин's mansion. Also take note here of the portraits. We've got Ilium Lois. We've got the Duke's Archives at Anor Londo. We've got Nashandra. Non-curse variety this time. I guess they cropped the image just right. We've got Broom Tower. And we've got, of course, Anor Londo. Yes, the original is smaller. Okay, good. I thought so, but my memory is possibly shaky. This is the problem. you guys are coming for me to lore, and you're asking the guy with the goldfish memory who needs to write this stuff down just to keep track of it in his own head. And even that is barely functional. Anyway, as we can see, all these places, of course, Anor Londo and the Duke's Archives associate this with Gwyndolin, because, of course, loves Anor Londo. Close connections to Seath in various respects. Abyssal Archive will again cover that more. But we also see these places from Dark Souls 2 where Children of Dark were. Now, we don't see any representation of the Sunken Kingdom with its Child of Dark, because presumably, I guess I should say Child of Dark. I'm pretty sure they're called Children of Dark, right? At some point. Anyway, whatever you want to call them. The point is that all the crazy fragments of Manus' Dark Soul turned into crazy ladies. They, one of them is missing, and it seems to be just because, you know, it's deep underground. Who the hell would know? Rumors of stories aren't getting around about the lady like a million miles beneath our feet. Gwyndolin is a man with discerning taste in art. Ah, yes, his sister. Again, truly he's a man of culture. As someone with a Kirino face for my avatar, I can respect that. Now, the point being that Gwyndolin has a lot of interest in these places. Now, recall again that we know that Zorig, he went to Ilium Lois, and he went to Broom Tower, which are both, of course, in Drang Lake, where he could have also explored, though I don't think we see anything related to Knights of Drang Lake there. But, suspicious. Zorig happens to go all the way to the far north in the New World to find these places that Gwyndolin also has a profound interest in, and probably because he's concerned that those Children of Dark could become a problem in the future. What if Zorig, the Night Slayer, was dispatched by Gwyndolin to do some reconnaissance and potential extermination? Again, as we know, Zorig has proven himself by killing Darkwraiths and taking their red eye orbs, so this could have brought him to the God of the Dark Moon's attention, getting rid of the god's enemies out in the world already. Zorig, of course, just cares about finding powerful foes, especially knights to slay, and Gwyndolin could direct him to there. And, of course, most importantly, there's the fact that Zorig is wearing Black Iron Tarkus' armor. Armor which we last saw in Anor Londo, and assuming that the Chosen Undead did not loot it from Tarkus' corpse, would have presumably been collected by the forces of Anor Londo. Again, we don't see it in Dark Souls 2, so we can infer that it was probably not warped all the way over there with some of the painting guardians. I guess that part of the gallery was safe, or maybe it was already collected before then. The point being is that Gwyndolin could have very easily collected that and kept it on his person, and then sort of gave it to Zorig as a reward for his services, checking out these places where rumored dark monstrosities exist, or it was given to him in advance payment. Either way, we get an idea. Now, there's our Silver Knight buddies. Now, the Silver Knights were royal guards of Anor Londo, protecting the royalty, much like the giant sentinels we see in the Anor Londo Cathedral. There we go. As we see here, this one has a divine blessing. Again, the way he looks at Guinevere kind of shows that he's a fan, and that he's apparently met her, and his bias was able to give him something nice to enjoy, in case he ever needed it. Now recall that Guinevere is a patron to warriors. She's not necessarily a war god, but she is a god to those who do war. Her priests or priestesses they were called saintesses or holy women, though the localization called them maidens in Dark Souls 1, would essentially act as the princess's guard, providing their blessings of protection and healing to the warriors out in the field. Oh, Now, several things to note about these Silver Knights is that unlike the ones in Dark Souls 1, they are considered hollows with the Hollow Slayer Greatsword. They also provide embers, of course, charge humanity, as the quote-unquote strong enemies of the area. So there is this indication that these Silver Knights, while the ones in Dark Souls 1 were indicated to just be of the same race as the gods, the ones here were called, were likely humans. Again, this ties into what we saw earlier with the idea of propaganda for the human residents of Irithel, seeing the idea of, you know, take up your sword, and with it the duties to God and country. So there is this idea that the Silver Knights, either they all died out by themselves or whatever happened, they ended up being replaced or succeeded by humans wanting to hold up their legacy. Now, this may be the reason why we see them use lightning power, which we don't see the original Silver Knights ever employ. They have the blessed holy weapons, but that's about it. So there may be an idea of overcompensating by trying to show, hey, see, we have the legitimacy as we hold the power of the gods, much like the originals did in their soul. Oh, yeah, that's what I wanted. Okay, we'll talk about the pots in a second. Oh, right. It's the other one. Oh my gosh. Come on. There we go. And he's dead. That took much longer than needed. I was being a little too careful. The Spear Silver Knights also learned Ornstein's charge move. Well, yes, but we can assume that goes back to the original Silver Knights taking part in the Dragon Hunts, right? Because those with the spears would be part of that type of vanguard. So we can imagine that those are again moves that are inherited. But again, the idea, of course, being that the actual use of the lightning might be the human Silver Knights overcompensating because they don't have that natural lightning power in their souls like the medial Silver Knights were. Now, medial is the term I use for the race of the gods to separate it from the status, because as we learn, the godhood is not a state of being. It is something that you can marry into, as in the case of Seath, or something you can lose, as in the case of the Firstborn, and that has to be qualified because obviously the Warriors of Sunlight still consider him a war god and worship him as such, as well as like people when they worship him as Faram out in Ferosa. But again, it's all sort of this very relative thing, and it gets even more complicated when you consider, oh, their humans have been retroactively deified, like Ferris and with Ivlana, or we have cases of trees, like the quote-unquote spirit tree, of the undead settlement that becomes the curse-wadded Greatwood being worshipped as a god. So like godhood becomes this very complicated thing to talk about of what is a god. So it's easier to separate godhood as the status versus the race, the clan of the gods at Anor Londo, the medials. Now, we can then talk about, okay, is Nito part of this clan, or was part of this clan? Was Isla part of this clan, or was part of this clan? And again, the idea being is that the medials is a great way, like just an easy catch-all term to kind of talk about, okay, this race that ranges between the size of giants and humans are the medials. Now, we see here that in this area is Smo's Great Hammer, the Leo Ring, and another Divine Blessing. Again, Guinevere, but we also see stuff that was belonging to Ornstein and Smo. Again, much like Tarkus's armor, you can easily imagine Gwyndolin collecting these very important major relics in the wake of the battle at Anor Londo after the events of Dark Souls 1. And then he sort of keeps these things for himself and, sometimes, give it away to some worthy servant who's performing a good service. Now, we don't know if the mansions have lots of these pots everywhere, but at least here we see that there are these pots which are containing the cold. So it seems to be the idea of these pots absorb the chill in the air, so that way the manors can stay warm despite the cold weather. Now notice the the Silver Knights are hollow, which of course implies that they were killed and joined the undead. And it looks like at least a decent amount of time has passed, though, even before this event, because again, lots of death and dying is happening here. Because it looks like the manor has not seen a proper visitor in a while. It's just sort of, again, much like the Yorshka church, left to rot in, which gives us the idea that, much like the Yorshka church, there's foul play afoot. Now, as we climb up this way, I don't think there's any items or anything here, but let me just make sure. Yeah. We see some clergy statues up ahead, kind of cementing this path. And now, imagine Gwyndolin is having his quote-unquote walk to work every morning. Which, honestly, I would love to see Irithyll during daytime. That'd be kind of neat. Oh, that's missed me. Lucky me. Just out of range. The idea is that Gwyndolin, with his little snake legs, goes squirming up here. He passes by two statues of clergy, so kind of giving, like, the morning, like, good morning, sir, etc., etc., like showing the respects that the clerics would show him as a god, and even more importantly, a rather important god. Now, these dogs have received a cold enchantment, so again, much like the Pontiff Knights, there's the idea that these slaves are learning this magic from Sulyvahn and his cronies. There we go. Now, as Gwyndolin continues on his way to work, he's greeted by his sister here at this little, like, almost like a wishing urn. Oh my gosh. Come on. Let's open that shortcut before mistakes are made. Alright, now this is of course an easy way for Gwyndolin to then greet his sister down there. He takes the lift up, and then he goes up here, and what do you know, he's at the cathedral to do his work, his day on the job. Now, before we finish up, let's go. Deal with this buddy here. And now, next time we're going to probably continue on to this mansion. Finish up the... Actually, you know what? We don't really need to, I don't think. Yeah, we'll start with Irithyll Dungeon tomorrow, because we want to go to Profane Capital and get Orbeck his scroll. So, okay, everyone. I think this is going to be where we... Oh no, oh no, oh no. I think this is going to be about where we call it. Irithyll's, of course, a big place. So there's quite a bit more to talk about in terms of the lore and everything, but I think we've gotten a good idea. There is this conflict with the Deep going on, clearly. There is the general bad history under Sulyvahn's tyrannical rule that we see exhibited. There's stuff with the painting world being already alluded to. There's stuff about Gwyndolin already being alluded to, and the history of Irithyll as a whole. And we're gonna have to put a little pause on that as we try to dive deeper and understand Sulyvahn and the Profane Flame. So, thanks, guys. We got a few really good questions this time. I wanted to try streaming a little earlier in order for different people to come in, and I was glad to see a bunch of different people as well as some familiar faces come in. So again, hopefully we can in the future do like an even earlier stream, so that way even more new faces can come in. But I'm glad to have some different people kind of dropping in by the chat. Thanks again. Anything else? No, I think that's all. So yeah, see you guys. Bye.